My parents have been insisting for years that events from my childhood never happened and that I'm remembering things wrong or making them up for attention. Last week, I found boxes of home videos, journals, and medical records in their attic that prove every single thing they denied. I confronted them with the evidence, and instead of apologizing, they're now claiming I fabricated everything. My siblings believe them, and I feel like I'm losing my mind. I'm writing this from my therapist's office waiting room because I need to document what's happening before I start questioning my own sanity again. 5 days ago, I discovered irrefutable proof that my parents have been gaslighting me about my childhood for over a decade. When I showed them the evidence, they didn't apologize or acknowledge the truth. They just moved the goalposts and started denying the evidence itself. Now my entire family thinks I'm having a mental breakdown, and I'm terrified they might actually convince me I am. I'm 28F, and my parents are Brenda and Kenneth. I have two younger siblings, Iris, who's 25F, and Maxwell, who's 22M. For the past 10 years, my parents have been systematically denying major events from my childhood. At first, I thought I was misremembering things. Then I thought maybe my memory was genuinely faulty. Now I know they've been deliberately rewriting history, and I don't understand why. It started when I was about 18. I'd mention something from childhood, and my mom would get this confused look and say that never happened. Small things at first. I'd talk about a family vacation, and she'd insist we never went there. I'd mention a childhood friend, and she'd say I was thinking of someone else. I'd reference an incident at school, and she'd tell me I was making it up. The denials got bigger over time. When I was 20, I brought up how I'd been hospitalized for pneumonia when I was 8. My parents both looked at me like I was crazy. My dad said I'd never had pneumonia. My mom said I'd never been hospitalized as a child except when I was born. I was so confused because I had vivid memories of being in the hospital. The oxygen mask. Missing 2 weeks of school. But they were so certain it never happened that I started doubting myself. When I was 22, I mentioned in therapy that I'd had an eating disorder in high school. My therapist asked if I'd gotten treatment. I said my parents had taken me to see someone, but I couldn't remember details. I asked my parents about it later. They said I never had an eating disorder. My mom said I was always a healthy eater. My dad said I was making up problems that didn't exist. I showed them my yearbook photos where I was clearly severely underweight. My mom said I was just thin. Some people are naturally thin. At 24, I started having panic attacks. My new therapist asked about my childhood mental health. I mentioned that I'd struggled with anxiety as a kid. She asked if I'd been treated. I said I wasn't sure. I called my parents to ask. They said I never had anxiety as a child. They said I was always a happy, easy kid. Kenneth said I was probably confusing myself with someone else or creating false memories from watching too many movies about troubled teens. Every time they denied something, I'd question my own memory. Was I making things up? Did I have some kind of memory disorder? Was I actually remembering someone else's life? I went so far as to get a neurological evaluation to see if something was wrong with my brain. The tests came back normal. The neurologist said my memory function was fine. But I still couldn't reconcile my memories with what my parents insisted was true. My siblings weren't helpful. Iris was 3 years younger than me, so she didn't remember most of my childhood clearly. Maxwell was 6 years younger, so he remembered even less. When I'd ask them if they remembered certain events, they'd usually say no. My parents would use this as proof I was making things up. See? Nobody else remembers this because it didn't happen. The gaslighting got more aggressive as I got older. Last year, I mentioned to family at Thanksgiving that I was grateful I'd recovered from my childhood health issues. My parents asked what health issues. I said the pneumonia and the other respiratory problems I'd had as a kid. Brenda said very firmly that I'd never had respiratory problems. She said I was always a healthy child. I said that couldn't be right because I remembered being sick constantly. Kenneth said I had a normal amount of childhood colds, and I was exaggerating in my memory. I pushed back. I said I specifically remembered missing a lot of school because of breathing problems. My mom said I had perfect attendance in elementary school. I said that definitely wasn't true. She said she still had my attendance awards to prove it. I asked to see them. She said she'd have to look for them, but she knew they were somewhere in the attic. That conversation bothered me for weeks. My memories felt so real. The hospital, the breathing treatments, missing school. But my parents were so confident, and my siblings didn't remember. I started seriously wondering if I had some kind of psychological condition that made me create false memories. 2 weeks ago, I went to visit my parents. They asked me to help clean out their attic because they were planning to downsize eventually. I agreed. I spent hours going through boxes of old papers and photos. Then I found a box labeled with my name and years from my childhood. Inside were medical records, discharge papers from the hospital when I was 8. The diagnosis was severe pneumonia requiring 5 days inpatient treatment. There were prescription records for antibiotics and breathing medications. There were doctor's notes about my chronic respiratory infections. There were letters from school about my excessive absences due to illness. I sat in that attic staring at these papers feeling like reality was breaking apart. These were official medical documents. Hospital letterhead, doctor's signatures, prescription labels with my name. This was proof that everything I remembered was real. And my parents had been lying to me for years saying it never happened. I kept digging through the box. I found journals my mom had kept when I was a child. Entries about taking me to the doctor. Entries about me being sick again. Entries about missing work because I was in the hospital. Entries about being worried about my health. All written in her handwriting. There were report cards showing I'd missed significant amounts of school. There were letters from teachers expressing concern about my absences. There were photos of me in a hospital bed, looking tiny and sick with an oxygen tube in my nose. I found therapy intake paperwork from when I was 15. The presenting problem was listed as eating disorder and anxiety. There were treatment notes, session summaries, everything documented. I found home videos, hours of them. Me as a child, clearly struggling with breathing. Me coughing constantly. Me using an inhaler. Me looking exhausted and sick in ways that were obvious, even on old VHS footage. Everything I remembered was real. Everything they'd told me never happened was documented in their own records and videos. They hadn't just been dismissing my memories. They'd been actively lying to me about verifiable facts. I loaded the box into my car. I didn't tell my parents what I'd found. I drove home and spent 2 days going through everything, making notes, cross-referencing dates, building a timeline. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. I scanned everything. I digitized the videos. I created a comprehensive document showing every incident they denied alongside the proof it actually happened. Hospital records proving the pneumonia they said never occurred. Medical records proving the respiratory issues they said I never had. Therapy records proving the eating disorder and anxiety they said I made up. Report cards proving the school absences they said didn't exist. 3 days ago, I invited my parents over. I said I needed to talk to them about something important. They came over looking concerned. I think they thought I was going to announce a pregnancy or something. I pulled out the document I'd created. I said I'd found the box in their attic. I showed them the medical records, the journals, the videos, everything. I said I needed them to explain why they'd been telling me for years that these things never happened when there was documented proof they did. The look on their faces was something I'll never forget. Not guilt, not shame, just shock that I'd found evidence. My dad recovered first. He said I was misinterpreting the documents. I asked how you misinterpret a hospital discharge paper with my name and a pneumonia diagnosis. He said that might be from a different time or a different hospital stay I was conflating with other memories. My mom looked at the journals. Her own handwriting. Her own words about my childhood illnesses. She said she didn't remember writing those entries. She said journals aren't always accurate because people exaggerate when they're emotional. Asked if she was saying she lied in her private journal. She said no, but memory is complicated, and she might have been overdramatic about normal childhood sickness. I showed them the videos. Clear footage of me struggling with health issues they denied for years. Kenneth said those videos were taken out of context. He said all kids cough sometimes, and it didn't mean I had chronic respiratory problems. I pointed to the timestamp on a video showing me using an inhaler. He said lots of kids use inhalers for minor issues. I showed them the therapy intake paperwork, the official diagnosis of eating disorder. Brenda said therapists sometimes write things down wrong or misdiagnose. I said there were months of treatment notes. She said she didn't remember me going to that many sessions. Maybe I only went a few times, and they wrote more notes than necessary. They had an excuse for everything. Every piece of evidence had an explanation for why it didn't mean what it clearly meant. Hospital records were misinterpreted. Journals were exaggerated. Videos were out of context. Therapy notes were wrong. Report cards were anomalies. I asked them directly why they'd been lying to me. Brenda started crying. She said they hadn't been lying. She said they genuinely didn't remember things the way I did. She said memory is unreliable, and just because something is written down doesn't mean it's the full story. Kenneth said I was being aggressive and accusatory when they were just trying to be honest about their memories. I lost it. I said they'd made me question my sanity for years. They'd made me think I had a memory disorder. They'd convinced me I was making up my own childhood. And now I had proof that everything I remembered was real, and they were still denying it. Kenneth said I was being dramatic. He said they'd never tried to make me doubt myself. They'd just been sharing their perspective. If their perspective didn't match mine, that didn't mean they were lying. It meant we had different experiences of the same events. I asked how we could have different experiences of documented facts. Brenda said facts aren't as simple as I was making them out to be. She said yes, I'd been sick as a child, but not as severely as I remembered. Yes, I'd struggled in high school, but not with a serious eating disorder. Everything I remembered happened, but in a much less dramatic way than I thought. This was somehow worse than the outright denial. They were acknowledging the evidence existed but reframing it, so they were still right about my memories being wrong. I hadn't been that sick. I hadn't struggled that much. I was exaggerating reality, even though reality was documented in hospital records. I told them to leave. Brenda begged me to understand. She said they loved me and never meant to hurt me. She said if I'd felt gaslit, that wasn't their intention. Kenneth said I needed to calm down and stop being so emotional about the past. I said the past wouldn't be such an issue if they'd stop lying about it. He said he'd never lied to me. He'd just remembered things differently. They left. I immediately called Iris. I needed someone in my family to validate that what just happened was insane. I told her about finding the records and confronting our parents. I sent her some of the scanned documents. I said I couldn't believe they were still denying reality, even when faced with proof. Iris was quiet for a long time. Then she said maybe our parents had a point about interpretation. She said medical records can be complicated, and maybe I was reading too much into them. I asked if she'd actually looked at what I sent her. She said yes, but she wasn't a doctor, so she couldn't really say what it all meant. I said you don't need to be a doctor to read a hospital discharge summary that says severe pneumonia. Iris said our parents had always been good to us. She said they wouldn't lie about something this serious. She said maybe they genuinely remember things differently, and that doesn't make them bad people. I asked if she thought I was lying about finding all this evidence. She said no, but maybe I was so invested in being right that I was interpreting neutral evidence as proof of something that wasn't there. I sent her a video. Clear footage of 8-year-old me in a hospital bed with medical equipment visible. She watched it. Then she said it was hard to tell from a video how sick I really was. She said kids end up in the hospital for minor things all the time. Maybe it had seemed like a big deal at the time, but in retrospect it was just a normal childhood illness. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own sister was rewriting reality, right in front of me. I said this wasn't a normal childhood illness. This was severe pneumonia requiring hospitalization. She said I was getting upset over medical terminology. I hung up. I called Maxwell. Surely he'd see how insane this was. I explained everything. I sent him documents. I sent him videos. I said our parents had been lying to me for years, and I had proof. Maxwell said he didn't really remember much from when I was a kid since he was so much younger. He said he couldn't speak to what did or didn't happen. But he said our parents had never seemed like liars to him. He said maybe this was a miscommunication that got out of hand. I said it wasn't a miscommunication. They'd explicitly told me things never happened that I had documentation proving did happen. Maxwell said he didn't want to get in the middle of it. He said it seemed like there were different perspectives on the past, and everyone thought they were right. I said there aren't different perspectives on whether I was hospitalized. Either I was, or I wasn't. The hospital records say I was. He said he wasn't going to take sides in a family argument. I realized my siblings weren't going to help me. They'd rather believe our parents than look at objective evidence. Or maybe they just didn't want to accept that our parents had been lying because that would complicate their own relationships with them. Yesterday, my mom called. She said she'd been talking to Iris and Maxwell. She said everyone was worried about me. She said I seemed to be fixating on the past in an unhealthy way. She suggested I talk to my therapist about why I needed to prove my parents wrong so badly. Asked if she was seriously suggesting I needed therapy because I'd proven she'd been lying to me. She said she hadn't been lying. She'd been remembering things how she remembered them. I said her own journals contradicted how she remembered things. She said journals are just one perspective. They don't capture the full truth. Kenneth got on the phone. He said they were concerned I might be having some kind of mental health crisis. He said fixating on childhood medical records wasn't normal behavior. He said healthy people don't dig through attics looking for evidence to use against their parents. I said I'd found evidence by accident while helping them clean. He said but then I'd spent days scanning and analyzing it, which seemed obsessive. They were flipping the script. I was the problem. My discovery of their lies was evidence of my instability. The fact that I documented everything was proof I was fixated and unhealthy. They were using my attempt to prove the truth against me as evidence I was mentally unwell. I told them I wasn't going to engage with their gaslighting anymore. Brenda said there was that word again. Gaslighting. She said I'd learned that word in therapy, and now I applied it to every disagreement. She said just because we remembered things differently didn't mean they were gaslighting me. Kenneth said accusing your parents of psychological abuse because they have different memories than you is actually quite cruel. I hung up. I've barely slept since then. I keep looking at the documents I scanned, reading the medical records, watching the videos, proving to myself over and over that I'm not crazy, that these things happened, that I'm not making it up. But then I think about how confident my parents are, how quickly my siblings sided with them, how everyone seems to think I'm the one with the problem. And I start to wonder if maybe I am interpreting things wrong. Maybe hospital records don't mean what I think they mean. Maybe my memories are distorted even though they match the documentation. Maybe I am having some kind of mental health crisis. This is what gaslighting does. Even when you have proof, even when you have receipts, the person doing it is so confident and gets enough people on their side that you start doubting reality itself. I have videos of myself as a sick child. I have hospital records. I have therapy notes. And I'm still questioning whether I'm right about what happened to me. My therapist appointment is in 10 minutes. I brought copies of everything. I need a professional to look at this evidence and tell me I'm not crazy, to confirm that what I'm seeing is real, that my parents really did lie to me, that I'm not misinterpreting or exaggerating or having a breakdown. But I'm also terrified she'll look at everything and say what my family is saying, that these documents don't prove what I think they prove, that I'm reading too much into things, that my need to be right about the past is concerning. I don't know if I can handle one more person telling me my reality isn't real. Reddit, I need outside perspective before I walk into this therapy session. Am I crazy? Is it possible to misinterpret a hospital discharge paper? Can someone have months of documented therapy for an eating disorder that wasn't actually serious? Could my parents genuinely remember my childhood completely differently than documented medical records show it was? Or are they gaslighting me so effectively that they've gotten my siblings to help them convince me I'm mentally unstable? Is this what it feels like when gaslighting meets reality? The gaslighter doesn't back down even when confronted with proof. They just deny the proof itself. And everyone around you is so used to believing them that they doubt the evidence too. I need to know I'm not losing my mind. But I also need to know if there's any universe in which my parents are right and I'm misinterpreting everything. Because right now I honestly can't tell anymore.